Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we're jumping right in today because we've got a lot of ground to cover. We're talking about the deeply complicated, surprisingly chaotic, and honestly entirely fascinating family of Jacob. Look, if you've ever felt like your own family gatherings are a bit stressful, or maybe your household is a little dysfunctional, just wait until you hear about the historical family tree we're unpacking today. Let's get right into the incredibly messy origins of Israel.
So let me ask you right off the bat, have you ever argued with a sibling? You know, fighting over who gets the front seat, who snagged the last slice of pizza, or, let's be real, who your parents supposedly like more. Squabbling with your brothers and sisters is pretty much a universal human experience. But this family, the one we're analyzing today, they take sibling rivalry to an entirely different, intensely toxic level. It's a story full of brokenness for sure, but ultimately, it's a story of profound purpose. To really wrap our heads around this incredible story, we need to start with some, well, shocking family math. And it all begins with the number one father. His name is Jacob, and honestly, the simplicity of having just one patriarch is pretty much the only simple thing about this entire household.
Because that simplicity vanishes literally the second we hit our next number, 4. Here is where the massive immediate complication gets introduced. There were 4 different mothers involved in this one single household. Through a really complex string of events, marriages, and cultural practices involving servants, Jacob had children with Leah, his first wife, Rachel, his second and absolutely most beloved wife, Bilhah, Rachel's servant, and Zilpah, Leah's servant. So yeah, definitely not the ideal family arrangement designed back in the garden, and it created a total pressure cooker of tension.
Which brings us to the absolute punchline of this massive family dynamic, 12. A grand total of 12 sons living under one very tense, highly competitive roof. Think about that for a second. 12 boys, 4 mothers, 1 father, and a whole lot of really complicated feelings. I mean, can you even imagine the sheer volume of noise, the competition, the utter chaos in that camp?
Now, the context of the father's identity is absolutely crucial here. By the time a lot of these boys were growing up, Jacob had actually received a new name after a pretty mysterious encounter at the Jabbok River. His new name was Israel, which translates to "he struggles with God" or "God strives." And wow, does this definition perfectly foreshadow the immense emotional and relational struggles this family is about to face. They are going to struggle with each other, and they are going to struggle heavily with God's plan for them. The real crux of understanding all this struggle is looking at the dynamic between the 2 primary sisters, Leah and Rachel. On one side, we've got Leah, the wife with many children. On the exact opposite side, we have Rachel, the wife who is loved most. They were sisters, yes, but they were bitter rivals. Rachel had Jacob's heart, but for the longest time, she just couldn't have children. Leah had the children, but she was absolutely desperate to win Jacob's love. Each woman was desperately trying to prove her worth to Jacob through childbearing, and you better believe that toxic competition bled directly into the lives of their sons.
And the reality of that competition? It's honestly staggering. Just consider the incredibly unequal distribution of children. Leah completely dominated childbearing. She had 6 sons with Jacob. Literally half the boys were hers. Then you've got Zilpah and Bilhah with 2 each. And finally Rachel, the favorite wife, with only 2 sons. This isn't just a bunch of numbers. It's a map of a painful, agonizing struggle for validation going on inside a deeply divided home.
We're looking at just a few of the 12 sons right now, but their names are incredibly revealing. Almost every single son's name serves as this permanent, totally unfiltered record of their mother's raw emotions right at the time of birth. Look at Leah. She named Simeon "one who hears" because she felt God actually heard her sorrow. Bilhah's son, Naphtali, means "my wrestling," literally referring to the wrestling match between the sister wives. And then consider Benjamin, born to Rachel as she was tragically dying in childbirth. She originally named him "son of my sorrow." It just goes to show God is deeply present in these brutally honest, unfiltered, and deeply messy moments.
Part 1. The favorite son. So as Rachel's long-awaited firstborn, Joseph ended up receiving all the intense love Jacob had for his late wife. And Jacob? He didn't even try to hide this favoritism. He gifted Joseph an ornate, incredibly valuable special robe. Think about what that actually means practically. To the other 11 brothers, some of whom were much older, out in the field sweating and laboring for their dad for years, this robe was a constant, highly visible insult. It was basically Jacob broadcasting to the whole family, "This one is my favorite. The rest of you are second best."
As you can probably guess, that kind of blatant favoritism has devastating consequences. It started with just boiling jealousy, with the older brothers absolutely despising Joseph. But then, as we read in Genesis 37, it escalated to unthinkable betrayal. The brothers actually conspired against their own flesh and blood. They literally sold Joseph into slavery in Egypt and then turned around and told their father he had been killed by a wild animal. It is a staggering level of family dysfunction and cruelty.
Now, I want us to pause for a moment. Through this family, all nations of the earth would be blessed. This is the massive, undeniable, and yet moment of our story. This family is blended, it's unequal, it's violently jealous, and outright cruel to one another. They are not one bit picture perfect. And yet, God had already promised Jacob, and Abraham and Isaac right before him, that through this exact, broken, intensely messy family, all nations would be blessed. God didn't sit around waiting for them to clean up their act before he chose them.
Part 2. The 12 Tribes of Israel.
These 12 deeply flawed brothers, exactly as they were, transformed into the founding tribes of God's people. Every single tribe has a name, every tribe has a story, and it all traces right back to those 12 boys in that one chaotic tent. Their names literally echo into eternity. I mean, the book of Revelation actually describes the names of these 12 tribes written right on the gates of the New Jerusalem. Plus, here's a wild detail. Joseph doesn't actually get a single tribe named after him. Instead, his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, each get a tribe, which effectively gives the favorite son a double portion. And finally, Levi's descendants, the Levites, don't even receive a territory of land. Instead, they get set apart as the priestly tribe to serve in the tabernacle.
So the absolutely crucial historical takeaway here is this. Unity does not mean sameness. You had 12 wildly different boys, born from 4 totally different mothers, with wildly different personalities and callings. And yet, together, they grew into one united people, the children of Israel. This just brilliantly illustrates that unity is something you eventually grow into. It's not necessarily something you start out with. God works so powerfully through our differences.
Furthermore, this family story sets up a massive theological thread. We see a clear gospel pattern of rescue coming directly through betrayal. Selling Joseph into slavery, that looked like the absolute end of his story. But actually, Joseph's terrible suffering becomes the exact method God uses to save them. Years later, Joseph rises to intense power in Egypt and is the one who rescues his entire family, the very brothers who betrayed him, mind you, from a deadly famine. God is already at work right in the middle of the mess, bringing rescue right out of betrayal. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly comforting question to ponder. Does a family have to be perfect for God to use it? Looking at the origins of Israel, the overwhelming, undeniable answer is no. God didn't pick an ideal family. He picked a real one. They were jealous, wounded, and yet loved anyway. So whatever mess you might see in your own life or your own family, remember this. God doesn't wait for us to have it all together. He builds something truly beautiful right in the middle of our mess. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you wanting to explore the rest of this incredible story.